Even if North Korean cyber warriors didn't hack Sony, there are lots of reasons why we might think they did. Here are some ideas about why. In case you missed it, over the most recent festive period, some media meets politics meets foreign policy meets cyber war capers went down. Sony Pictures Entertainment was hacked. All kinds of sensitive, important, and embarrassing information was leaked. Concurrently, Sony was slated to release The Interview, a movie about two schlocky journalists involved in a plot to assassinate North Korea's supreme haircut, Kim Jong-un. In response to the film, ostensibly North Korean internet troublemakers threatened violent retribution upon its release. Sony scrapped the premiere, but after a PR nightmare, released it anyway. I watched it yesterday, on demand. It was, a movie? Anyway, it would seem that all of this, Sony being hacksored, The Interview, North Korea, terrorist threats, it all fits into a nice, neat little narrative. North Korea, a country we know to have been training cyber warriors for the last number of years, infiltrates the servers of the notoriously bad at securifying their stuff Sony in response to a film that, alongside a bunch of butt jokes, pokes fun at and depicts the demise of its most revered Marshal of the Republic. The FBI has said that this is the case. President Obama even acted on this narrative, issuing the first ever executive order sanctioning a country for perpetrating a cyber attack. A thing which I fear will never sound serious no matter how awful the results. It's just very hard to take seriously the cyber attack. Just, I don't know. And for a lot of people, the story ends here. This is just an unfortunate side effect of living in the 21st century. That's just the way it is. Except, lots of folks aren't buying this narrative. Was it really North Koreans who hacked Sony? Security professionals say that the evidence is circumstantial at best. And was the hacking really in response to The Interview? It seems possible that the media drew the connection and then the perpetrators or someone corroborated just for lulz. Sources for this, by the way, and lots of them in the doobly-doo. Either way, the FBI, some news outlets, and some people were able to do a very convenient, if, as far as available knowledge goes, somewhat hasty thing. They could and did group two mysterious and narrowly understood groups of people, North Korea and hackers, into one threatening bundle o' other, which, in this case, maybe they should. Maybe they shouldn't. It's really hard to say, and that's what's interesting. To quote computer security expert Bruce Schneier, it's a strange future we live in when we can't tell the difference between random hackers and major governments, or when those same random hackers can credibly threaten international military organizations. In other words, reality is stranger than the Shadowrun game I'm currently GMing. Sally, watch our butts. For many of us, hackers and North Korea, or maybe more specifically its leader and combat forces, share a kind of menacing mystique. We don't know much, but what we do know feels like a peek behind some forbidden curtain. The glimpses we do get via the news or media or whatever form this kind of irresponsibly essentialist, sad, but no less threatening portrait. Aggressive, inhuman technophiles, malnourished victims of state-supported megalomania, but regardless, forces with which it is best to not reckon if you can help it. The shenanigans surrounding Sony and The Interview provide an opportunity to collapse these two groups, but... You mean shenanigans? Let's assume the InfoSec professionals who say it probably wasn't North Korea, but rather a former Sony employee or someone who just does this for shrimps and giggles are correct, which is a thing I, personally at least, am inclined to do. What then? What does that mean? Well, given Obama's executive order, it means that foreign policy needs to consider the fact that it has potentially just been influenced by random hackers, in Schneier's words. And perhaps more importantly, that those same random hackers can potentially influence foreign policy, which, as an aside, plays perfectly into the other essentialist portrait of hackers, not as basement-dwelling keyboard jockeys, but the more Hollywood portrayal as the kids from Hackers, or that Michael Mann film where Thor has to shoot guns at the hack source to stop them from exploding Jakarta, or whatever.
He's a convicted hacker, genius coder.
Anyway, at the heart of this, I think we're witnessing the effects of abstraction, of taking concrete ideas and practices and applying them to related but increasingly referential and general areas. The abstraction that we're all probably the most familiar with is the one that happened to money, which went from useful and valuable tradable commodity to gold-backed to fiat currency, and now, at its most abstract, to credit and all of its related and practically arcane financial instruments represented not by physical currency privacy and goods, but by laws, regulations, and records. The move to abstraction is one from specific practices to almost ephemerality, to concepts, from things to ideas. With Sony, the interview, and North Korea, we can see how we've also abstracted the state, the corporation, even combat. The hacking of an American-based subsidiary of a Japanese corporation by people who claim, maybe just for fun, to have acted in the interest of a secretive nation-state, responding to the portrayal of silly American journalists assassinating their comedically fictionalized leader, is called unflinchingly an act of war by US authorities. Abstractions in abstractions. The US is whatever the US has interest in, North Korea is whoever acts in its name, and an act of war is apparently any hostile action taken by the latter on the former. And the role of technology here, what is required to successfully defeat network security measures, only adds to the obfuscation. Ideally, in observation, a hacker is not a person, but more like a process, just something that happened to some system somewhere, and through no shortage of skill and cleverness is never once identified as human. Just something that happened. Only effects, no cause. I might wager that the future we live in is so strange and symptomatic of that strangeness that the line between random hackers and governments is so blurry for these very facts. That maybe as an effect of the postmodern condition, or an increasing comfort with ideas as opposed to objects, or a technologically inspired shift away from the primacy of the physical, we are increasingly comfortable with and able to operate in abstraction. Good, bad, I'm not saying either way, but I do think, personally at least, that comfort, or maybe even over-comfort, is what has led to some of the lines drawn between the US and Sony, North Korea and hackers, and the interview. The main characters of which, I think it's worth noting, were conscripted into the assassination plot because of their desire to do real journalism, to be making real news. Wish granted, I guess. What do you guys think? Does abstraction play some role in these North Korea allegedly hacking Sony over the interview shenanigans? If that's the word that you want to use? Shenanigans? Let us know in the comments, and you can turn the abstract concept of subscribing into a concrete practice by doing the thing. You know what I'm gonna say. I feel like we haven't spoken in weeks, because we haven't. Let's see what you guys had to say about the morning ritual video, which we made literally forever ago. So first things first, you might notice that it looks a little bit different. We're changing things up for next week's episode about cereal. Again, if you haven't listened to Serial, you should get going on that. You have 12 hours of material to cover. I know it's a little weird, so we'll make it a little bit more homey. Put up the record wall. Okay. Much better. All right, on with the business. Recently, you may have heard that you can now make animated GIFs of Idea Channel videos inside of YouTube, and you guys have made no shortage, so we will put some links to some of our favorites in the doobly-doo. They're really very good. They have consistently been making my day, so thank you for doing that, for making GIFs of my silly face. Esteban Raposo talks about how after you've developed a morning routine, you can really start to feel off-kilter, even that your life is no longer yours in some sense, and asks for some advice about how to deal with that kind of thing. And I think you kind of don't have to go any further than your fellow Idea Channel subscribers. There were a lot of commenters who wrote great comments about how they have had to be clever to try to figure out how to fit a routine, even if it's not in the morning, in their life, because they identified it as something that they needed. And reading these comments has been really, I think, heartening, like knowing that you know, people identify productivity as a thing that they really want and have to do, and that they will figure out a way to do it. Idea Channel subscribers, good at life. Relatedly, Shauna Suzu talks about how they are not able to have a morning routine because of their work schedule, but have figured out that an evening routine accomplishes a similar thing. And I want to stress this, that I think a lot of the ideas that we're trying to get at apply, even if it's not in the morning. We started with that thing because I think it's something that is recognizable and also available information for the types of people that we wanted to talk about. But yeah, like morning routine, afternoon routine, evening routine, you still equally contribute, I think, to this idea of comfort and being able to become a conduit, whether it is for creativity or just being a human being. Nina Bice asks a really great question about if you don't have a morning routine, if you're doing something different every morning, is that similar to having a Spartan lifestyle? And I think that if you follow the metaphor of the episode very closely, then the answer is maybe yes, that if the idea is that you're not owning things and in not repeating things you feel no ownership, then and insofar as a Spartan lifestyle is owning less stuff, I can totally see it. But I don't know, I'm having a hard time getting my mind around it because to me the Spartan lifestyle is very much about this diligence that I associate with routine. But I'd be really interested to hear what everybody else thinks about this and how they see this relating to other types of lifestyles. Like what, if you have a very opulent lifestyle with lots and lots of objects, is that a more complicated morning routine? I don't know. What do you think? Ripken Russell, I have one of those. It's called Reasonably Sound. You can find a link to it in the doobly-doo. It's about sound. You can listen to the crap out of it. Dan Rayner, it is a Bennington Potter's mug. They make the best mugs. This is my hand, it is down. Gresher Riza talks about how the basis for this idea is maybe unnecessarily romantic, and that the relationship that I explained isn't a thing that really exists, that we are just being trained to have this like or relationship with these objects just through their continued use, and that there are things like they mention the shower, the toilet, that are part of our daily routine that we choose not to love, or that we just do not love and do not consider as part of that larger picture. And I think that that is true, but I also think that it's maybe a little quick to not give credit to those sets of things that we do have relationships to, because I think we do have them and they are important. So overly romantic maybe, but I think only as an effect of our general over-romance with certain objects, which I think is fair and fine. Mitchell Gates writes a really interesting comment about the linguistic dimension of this idea and how ownership and saying that something is yours are things that are not necessarily isomorphic, that there is a separation between them, and that you can feel ownership over something that is yours, but you can feel that something is yours without actually having ownership over it, that you might not necessarily feel it, you might not even necessarily have it. And I think that this is a really important and interesting thing to talk about that I have no particular response to other than, Mitchell, this was a great comment. Thank you for writing this. Link to this comment and all of the others in the doobly-doo. This week's episode was brought to you by the hard work of these cyber warriors. We have a Facebook and IRC and a subreddit, which I didn't take any comments from this week. I totally forgot. I'm sorry, you guys. I will get them next week. Gah, I feel terrible. And the tweet of the week comes from Galactwee, who suggested that we do our Valentine's Day episode about Korasami. I think that sounds like a great idea.